Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Credo, our monthly series in which we ask the presenter to share their spiritual journey and what they give their hearts to. I'm Sharon Baker. I'm currently serving as the Adult Programming Coordinator this year, and we are delighted that you are here. I would like to express my thanks to Carol Gay she's our Credo Coordinator, for all the work that she does in trying to find our presenters. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carol.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. And thanks to all of you who showed up for Credo this morning at 10 on Zoom. Our schedule for Credo is going to change again. We've changed several times during the pandemic, but starting in April, we're going to hold Credo in person at 10:30 in the Bernstein Room. And you'll see reminders about this in Currents. And we don't have the capacity in the Bernstein Room to do Zoom. So for now, it'll only be in person. So today I'm happy to introduce our speaker, Gwen Movius. Many of you know her because she's been a member of our community since 1992. She served us in many ways over the years, including being president of our board. She's served on the stewardship team more than once. She's been on the Memorial Endowment Trust. And some of you may know her best because she's the head of the book club now. So Gwen will speak for about 20 minutes. And during that time, you can write any questions you might have on chat, or you can write the questions after she finishes, if you thought of things while she spoke. After she concludes, I'll read the questions to her and she'll respond for about 10 minutes. So I'll turn things over to you, Gwen. Welcome.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm not very techie, but I knew how to put up this virtual background of the Golden Gate because I'll be talking a fair amount about my hometown of Berkeley, and some people don't know that Berkeley is directly across from the Golden Gate. So this was my view for my growing up years. So I'm leaving it there. And I have prepared remarks. Don't know how to, do PowerPoint or any of those things. So I will just be sharing my prepared remarks. There is a quote in our hymnal from a poem by T.S. Eliot that I have chosen for closing words from time to time. The words are from the poem Little Gidding. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Today, I'm using the quote for opening words, and maybe I should call it a spoiler alert, because when I tell you where I started, it may be clear to you where I already was. But thinking back on my spiritual journey has been an extremely enjoyable exercise and has stimulated connections that I don't think I fully realized before. I was technically born in Oakland, California, because that's where the Naval Hospital was. But my parents lived in Berkeley, and my mother had lived in Berkeley since 1923, when her family moved there from Ithaca, New York, right around her 9th birthday. My mother's father was a professor of agriculture, hailing originally from Missouri. My mother's family attended the Unitarian Church in Ithaca, while in Berkeley, they tended to prefer the Congregational Church. Still, my mother always called herself a Unitarian. My father was raised in Redlands, California, a Baptist town with a small Baptist university, and surrounded then by an ocean of orange trees. My father's father was a Welsh immigrant and a staunch Baptist, so the family was steeped in that religion, even though my grandmother was a second-generation German whose father had been a Lutheran minister. My German great-grandparents had established Lutheran congregations in German communities up and down California in the late 19th century. My mother converted to being a Baptist in order to marry my dad in 1937, but by the time I was born in 1947, the last of 4 girls, My father had experienced World War II as a young doctor, mostly stationed in the Bay Area, but also deployed for a year as a flight surgeon on an escort carrier in the Pacific. He evidently returned as a confirmed non-believer. And from then on, when he referred to organized religion, he made it sound like organized crime. Meanwhile, if the topic of religion came up at dinners with my mom's sisters and offspring who lived in town, my mom would often lament, "I got dunked," clearly establishing baptism as a dreadful experience. Growing up unchurched in Berkeley was more unusual than you might think. Most of my friends seemed to identify with a religious tradition, although the range was extremely eclectic. Greek Orthodox, Mormon, Jewish, Christian Science, Lutheran, Methodist, or non-denominational Protestant. One neighbor was Catholic, and that was the religion I was least familiar with. The parochial school system in Berkeley was very strong, and there was a nearby Catholic elementary school that we would sometimes spy on because it seemed so odd to see kids in uniforms on the playground with black-clad nuns swirling around them. It felt very ominous, to use an anachronistic comparison, like Hogwarts. By the time I was 10 years old, I was quite sure there was no God and no afterlife. Besides intuiting that my parents did not believe in God, there was a lot going on in the 1950s to instill disbelief. I remember thinking that if God were all powerful, this Cold War with Khrushchev threatening to bury us would not be happening. I also remember thinking it would be very nice if there were a judgment day and people received appropriate retribution in the hereafter. But I didn't see mechanically how that could be accomplished. And what about all the non-Christians? You can't just ignore the majority of people on earth. A religion should apply to everybody. I graduated from Berkeley High in 1965. It was and is the only public high school in Berkeley, and at that particular time, it was a 3-year high school with 3,500 students, 50% of whom were white, 30% Black, and 20% Asian. Until high school, my exposure to Black students had been almost non-existent, but my mother always did her utmost to promote awareness and respect. She had been a federal welfare worker on the south side of Chicago when my dad was at Northwestern Med School. And she spoke vehemently about the conditions that the migrants of the Great Migration faced. Berkeley didn't look like it had slums, and I don't know what conditions were really like. But once or twice we got lost in Oakland near streets where the Black Panthers were active. And you couldn't help but think, whatever the Black Panthers do will be an improvement. In thinking about my early years, I realized that Mom was generally the righteous firebrand, albeit in a low-key way. In the 1950s, she volunteered, possibly weekly, as a counselor at Planned Parenthood. And the woman who was at our home, partly to clean and partly to look after us, was Mrs. Tanaka. I don't know how that arrangement came about, but Mom was furious about the Japanese internment camps, felt, probably correctly, that most California businessmen just wanted to steal Japanese property, and hiring Mrs. Tanaka might have been her attempt at some restitution. Mom was also a walking encyclopedia of consumer protection laws and a constant promoter of public schools. Leaving behind interesting issues of the day that influenced me, like the free speech movement at Cal, or my sister protesting the House of Un-American Activities committee hearings in San Francisco, or my cousin joining Cesar Chavez's union work, I'll move on with my spiritual journey. I traveled to my mother's birthplace of Ithaca, New York, to attend Cornell University, and I thought it might be worthwhile to attend the Unitarian Church of Ithaca to see if I was missing anything. I attended at least once and maybe twice in what was a very, very charming stone church. But the only sermon I remember was about how miserable conditions are in various places of the world, such as Africa, how privileged we are, and how we are obligated to do something. Given that the Vietnam War was escalating, and I was a freshman in college, my attention was elsewhere. In my sophomore year, I fell in love with medieval history. And from my vantage point now, I realized that one of the aspects of the Middle Ages that fascinated me was the idea of blind faith in a religion. The study of medieval history back then required a detailed study of church history and often involved issues of church and state. I became particularly interested in medieval Messianic movements. That is the idea that a Messiah was coming soon who would right all the wrongs in the world. Usually when these Messianic heresies appeared, they were promulgated by the working classes and promoted the upheaval of the social order. We are getting some feedback here. Can you hear
My
me?
goodness, I wonder what that is.
Here you go. Mine's muted.
Gwen?
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Oh, did you mute everybody?
I did, and I didn't mean to mute you. I'm so sorry.
Okay, no problem. So let me see if I can pick up where I left off. Messianic movements, I'm sure you're all on the edge of your seats. Anyway, usually when these Messianic heresies appeared, they were promulgated by the working classes and promoted the upheaval of the social order along the lines of the last shall be first and the meek shall inherit the earth. I wanted to pursue additional study in graduate school and chose the University of Chicago. My advisor ended up being a professor in the divinity school. He was a former priest in the process of being defrocked in order to marry a former nun. In fact, most of my classes seemed to be in the divinity school rather than the history department. I found the atmosphere of the divinity school to be very cozy and comforting, as if I were surrounded by secure and faithful people. Although I often wondered whether all these people really did believe in Christianity, and if so, why? Still, I needed a place of refuge my first year in Chicago because I was so horrified by two major events. First, Fred Hampton was assassinated in December in Chicago, orchestrated by the FBI. And then in the spring came Kent State. Ultimately, I spent 4 years in Chicago, but I dropped out of the PhD program at the start of the spring quarter of my second year after returning from a short trip to Costa Rica. I suddenly decided there was a much more lively world waiting to be experienced in the here and now. Luckily, I got a job in student financial aid at the university and discovered that I enjoy administration. I also became aware that women faced an extremely inequitable working life. I became interested in women's economic issues and worked briefly with my former advisor, the defrocked priest, to unionize non-teaching university workers, but we were unsuccessful. I met my late husband, Lee, at the University of Chicago, and although he had been confirmed in the Episcopal Church in Asheville with an actual godfather, Lee was totally uninterested in religion. We wed and were happily unapologetic about not attending church up to and including the birth of our daughter in 1980 in Charlotte. Our daughter went to a church-sponsored daycare and attended some vacation Bible schools because I thought it would be helpful later on. I myself was always playing catch-up trying to figure out Christian imagery and literature, so I thought our daughter should get more exposure to religion. When Diana was in third grade, a friend started taking her to Sunday school, and Diana was even given a Bible by the friend's grandmother to save my poor daughter's soul. Then in 1991, when Diana started 5th grade, she and her friend had a huge falling out, and Diana begged me to take her to Sunday school somewhere. Unlike my experience of being unchurched, Diana had been told more than once that she was going to hell, and she knew that going to Sunday school was a social necessity. Finally, we're getting back to where my story begins. I thought, well, the only place I can take Diana is to the Unitarian Church of Charlotte. The first Sunday I took her, my daughter was all dressed up in a smock dress, although I warned her that I didn't think kids dressed up. She was dismissive of my opinion, but quite incensed afterward and wondered why I let her wear a dress. Diana immediately loved RE, and I was immediately engaged by the services. I actually didn't know much about Unitarian Universalism and hadn't grasped that being an atheist would not necessarily prohibit me from being a UU. Back then, potential new members met for 4 consecutive Sunday evenings to learn about our church. We explored the UU principles and the UU sources. Up until then, I had the impression that Unitarianism was still basically Christian, and I was relieved to find out that was not the case. I enjoyed the services while Diana attended RE, and I realized I was enjoying something I didn't even know I was missing. I had been on a spiritual journey, but not a quest. In fact, a gift had been given to me that I was not seeking or expecting, which almost sounds like grace. My husband Lee did not join Diana and me until early 1992, when the choir director at the time was seeking an accompanist. I had no idea whether Lee would be interested, but music for Lee was his spirituality, and he accepted the volunteer position, as it turned out, for 15 years. For me, the UUCC is truly a beacon in the greater Charlotte community. I feel totally committed to support and maintain this community. I embrace our principles and, rather perversely, love the fact that our denomination is named after 2 heresies. Truly, I arrived at the place where I started and finally knew it. So those are my prepared remarks.
Love it, love it. And you're over there in Sausalito. I love it.
Well, that's where we spent our one-night honeymoon. So yeah.
Oh gosh, yes, I lived on the houseboat right next door.
Oh wow.
We must talk sometime soon. I must. My son was born in Hollywood. Dun, dun, dun. We'll talk.
I look forward to that.
Okay, I'm looking to see if we have any questions on chat, and so far I haven't found any. So let's, come on everybody, let's think of some questions for Gwen.
I have so much, and I would talk too much. I want to hear what other people have to say, because I mentioned Sausalito, and that got me excited right away.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What religious path have your siblings traveled?
Well, I told Carol that, you preparing this, it's almost like preparing a trip. You have to decide what you're going to leave out. And I had actually started to say that, very oddly, in the late 60s, when I got interested in medieval history, 2 of my 3 sisters converted to Catholicism. But I will say that it did not stick with either one of them. But, and I am the only one who, is a member of an established church, that the other 3 are not, but have, just religion is not that important to them. One sister, the sister who never dabbled in Catholicism, has occasionally attended UU churches. But yeah, no, it does seem kind of interesting that being unchurched, sometimes you do feel like you might be missing something.
We do have a question now. Has your daughter stayed with the UU Church?
Well, when she was married in 2018, and she and her husband, they did have a Unitarian minister in Washington, D.C. marry them. She embraces our principles, but somehow, and she lived, some of you probably know this, but she lived diagonally across the street from All Souls Unitarian in Washington, D.C. for 10 years. And she managed to roll out of bed on Sunday morning once or twice to get to a service, but she just sleeps in. And her husband is very open to Unitarianism as well, but it just seems to not fit in with their lifestyle.
Okay, anybody else? Well, I have a question that relates to something I know about you from a non-church context. I know that you enjoy the ballet, as I do too. And I wondered if that connects in any way to your spirituality.
The performing arts were very important for both Lee and me. When we met, Lee played the piano and I danced, and I love dancing. I will say I had one of the most wonderful experiences dancing. I preferred modern dance to ballet, but at the University of Chicago, I belonged to dance club, and the woman in charge of the program choreographed a piece to a Bach fugue that was played on the organ, and we danced that dance, which I guess would be considered a liturgical dance, in Rockefeller Chapel, which sounds like it'd be small, but the place is huge, just huge. English perpendicular, if you know something about medieval architecture. And we danced that in this huge Gothic building, played by a very accomplished organist, with the sound of the organ coming from, all up, around, and about. And that was, that was the numinous. I mean, that was really quite an experience. So, I've had some wonderful experiences with dance.
All right, somebody else wants to know about your interest in medieval studies. Have you continued with that interest? And do you have any book recommendations?
Well, when I dropped out of the program, I really felt like I had, learned all I ever wanted to know about medieval history. And it's not quite as bad as that. I got over, I sort of dabble in it from time to time, but I didn't care for Ken Follett's books. I couldn't get into those in terms of book recommendations. I fell in love with Ellis Peters' Cadfile mysteries from the 12th century in England. I just love that whole series. So that's one recommendation. I didn't, there are a lot of things you leave out, and books played an important part in my life, but that's a really big topic. So I can't necessarily go there, but yes, I love reading.
All right, here's another question. Do you feel any connection to the afterlife?
Well, no, I hate to, I was 10 years old. I realized I didn't believe in God, and I didn't believe in an afterlife, and I still don't. I don't.
Okay. I'm afraid our time is running short. Thank you so much, Gwen. This was one of the things I love about Credo is it helps me get to know people better, the speakers. And I'm so glad that you shared these things with us today. And
Well,
thank you very much. And everybody come back next month on, let's see, April the 24th. Our speaker then will be Sage Brooke, and it's at 10:30 in the Bernstein Room in person. So see you then.